Section 27 of The Wit and Humor of America, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Bologna Times. Section 27. Spelling Down the Master by Edward Eggleston. "I 'low," said Mrs. Means, as she stuffed the tobacco into her cob pipe after supper on that eventful Wednesday evening, "I 'low they'll app'int the Squire to gen out the words to night. They most always do, you see, 'case he's the peartest old man in this deestrict, and I 'low some of the young fellers would have to get up and dust ef they would keep up to him. And he uses sech remarkable smart words. He speaks so polite, too. But laws, don't I remember when he was poorer nor Job's turkey? 20 year ago, when he come to these here diggin's, that air Squire Hawkins was a poor Yankee schoolmaster that said pail instead of bucket, and that called a cow, and that couldn't tell to save his gizzard what we meant by low and by right smart. But he's larnt our ways now, and he's jest as civilized as the rest of us. You wouldn't know he ever been a Yankee. He didn't stay poor long, not he. He just married a right rich girl. He he!" And the old woman grinned at Ralph, and then at Mirandy, and then at the rest, until Ralph shuddered. Nothing was so frightful to him as to be fawned on by this grinning ogre, whose few lonesome blackish teeth seemed ready to devour him. "He didn't stay poor, you bet a hoss." And with this the coal was deposited on the pipe, and the lips began to crack like parchment as each puff of smoke escaped. "He married rich, you see." And here another significant look at the young master, and another fond look at Mirandy, as she puffed away reflectively. "His wife hadn't no book larnin'. She'd been through the spellin' book onct, and had got as fur as asperity on it a second time. But she couldn't read a word when she was married, and never could. She warn't overly smart. She hadn't hardly got the sense the law allows. But schools was scarce in them air days, and besides, book larnin' don't do no good to a woman. Makes her stuck up. I never knowed but one gal in my life as had ciphered into fractions, and she was so doggone stuck up that she turned up her nose one night at an apple peeling because I tuck a sheet off the bed to splice out the tablecloth, which was ruther short, and the sheet was most clean, too. Hadn't been slep on more'n oncet or twicet. But I was goin' fer to say that when Squire Hawkins married Virginny Gray he got a heap o' money, or what's the same thing, mostly a heap o' good land, and that's better'n book larnin', says I. Ef a gal had gone clean through all eddication, and got to the rule of 3 itself, that wouldn't buy a feather bed. Squire Hawkins jest put eddication agin the gal's farm, and traded even, and if airy one of 'em got swindled, I never heerd no complaints." And here she looked at Ralph in triumph, her hard face splintering into the hideous semblance of a smile, and Mirandy cast a blushing, gushing, all imploring, and all confiding look on the young master. "I say, old woman," broke in old Jack, "I say, what is all this here spoutin' about the Square fer?" And old Jack, having bit off an ounce of pigtail, returned the plug to his pocket. As for Ralph, he fell into a sort of terror. He had a guilty feeling that this speech of the old lady's had somehow committed him beyond recall to Mirandy. He did not see visions of breach of promise suits, but he trembled at the thought of an avenging big brother. "Hanner, you can come along too, ef you're a mind, when you get the dishes washed," said Mrs. Means to the bound girl as she shut and latched the back door. The Means family had built a new house in front of the old one, as a sort of advertisement of bettered circumstances, an eruption of shoddy feeling, but when the new building was completed they found themselves unable to occupy it for anything else than a lumber room, and so, except a parlor which Mirandy had made an effort to furnish a little, in hope of the blissful time when somebody should "set up" with her of evenings. The new building was almost unoccupied, and the family went in and out through the back door, which, indeed, was the front door also, for, according to a curious custom, the front of the house was placed toward the south, though the big road Hoosier for highway ran along the northwest side, or rather past the northwest corner of it. When the old woman had spoken thus to Hannah and had latched the door, she muttered, "That gal don't never show no gratitude for favors," to which Bud rejoined that he didn't think she had no great sight to be partickler thankful fur. To which Mrs. Means made no reply, thinking it best, perhaps, not to wake up her dutiful son on so interesting a theme as her treatment of Hannah. Ralph felt glad that he was this evening to go to another boarding place. He should not hear the rest of the controversy. Ralph walked to the schoolhouse with Bill. They were friends again. For when Hank Banta's ducking and his dogged obstinacy in sitting in his wet clothes had brought on a serious fever, Ralph had called together the big boys and had said, "We must take care of one another, boys. Who will volunteer to take turns sitting up with Henry?" He put his own name down, and all the rest followed. "William Means and myself will sit up tonight," said Ralph, and poor Bill had been from that moment the teacher's friend. He was chosen to be Ralph's companion. He was Puppy Means no longer. Hank could not be conquered by kindness, and the teacher was made to feel the bitterness of his resentment long after. But Bill Means was for the time entirely placated, and he and Ralph went to spelling school together. Every family furnished a candle. There were yellow dips and white dips, burning, smoking, and flaring. There was laughing and talking and giggling and simpering and ogling and flirting and courting. What a full dress party is to Fifth Avenue, a spelling school is to Hoopole County. It is an occasion which is metaphorically inscribed with this legend: "Choose your partners." Spelling is only a blind in Hoopole County, as is dancing on Fifth Avenue. But as there are some in society who love dancing for its own sake, so in Flat Creek district there were those who loved spelling for its own sake, and who, smelling the battle from afar, had come to try their skill in this tournament, hoping to freshen the laurels they had won in their school days. "I 'low," said Mr. Means, speaking as the principal school trustee, "I 'low our friends the Squire is jest the man to boss this 'ere consarn tonight. Ef nobody objects, I'll appoint him. Come, Squire, don't be bashful. Walk up to the trial, fodder or no fodder, as the man said to his donkey." There was a general giggle at this, and many of the young swains took occasion to nudge the girls alongside them, ostensibly for the purpose of making them see the joke, but really for the pure pleasure of nudging. The Greeks figured Cupid as naked, probably because he wears so many disguises that they could not select a costume for him. The Squire came to the front. Ralph made an inventory of the agglomeration, which bore the name of Squire Hawkins, as follows: 1. A swallow tail coat of indefinite age, worn only on state occasions, when its owner was called to figure in his public capacity. Either the Squire had grown too large or the coat too small. 2. A pair of black gloves, the most phenomenal, abnormal, and unexpected apparition conceivable in Flat Creek district, where the preachers wore no coats in the summer, and where a black glove was never seen except on the hands of the Squire. 3. A wig of that dirty waxen color so common to wigs. This one showed a continual inclination to slip off the owner's smooth bald pate, and the Squire had frequently to adjust it. As his hair had been red, the wig did not accord with his face, and the hair ungrayed was doubly discordant with a countenance shriveled by age. 4. A semicircular row of whiskers hedging the edge of the jaw and chin. These were dyed a frightful dead black, such a color as belonged to no natural hair or beard that ever existed. At the roots there was a quarter of an inch of white, giving the whiskers the appearance of having been stuck on. 5. A pair of spectacles, with tortoise-shell rim, wont to slip off. 6. A glass eye, purchased of a peddler, and differing in color from its natural mate, perpetually getting out of focus by turning in or out. 7. A set of false teeth, badly fitted, and given to bobbing up and down. 8. The squire proper, to whom these patches were loosely attached. It is an old story that a boy wrote home to his father begging him to come west because mighty mean men get into office out here. But Ralph concluded that some Yankees had taught school in Hoopole County who would not have held a high place in the educational institutions of Massachusetts. Hawkins had some New England idioms, but they were well overlaid by a Western pronunciation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, shoving up his spectacles and sucking his lips over his white teeth to keep them in place. "Ladies and gentlemen, young men and maidens, really I'm obleeged to Mr. Means fur this honor." And the squire took both hands and turned the top of his head round half an inch. Then he adjusted his spectacles. Whether he was obliged to Mr. Means for the honor of being compared to a donkey was not clear. I feel in the inmost compartments of my animal spirits a most happifying sense of the success and futility of all my endeavors to sarve the people of Flat Creek Deestrick and the people of Tompkins Township in my weak way and manner. This burst of eloquence was delivered with a constrained air and an apparent sense of a danger that he, Squire Hawkins, might fall to pieces in his weak way and manner, and of the success and futility of all attempts at reconstruction. For by this time the ghastly pupil of the left eye, which was black, was looking away round to the left, while the little blue one on the right twinkled cheerfully toward the front. The front teeth would drop down so that the squire's mouth was kept nearly closed, and his words whistled through. "I feel as if I could be grandiloquent on this interesting occasion," twisting his scalp round, "but really I must forego any such exertions. It is spelling you want. Spelling is a cornerstone, the grand, underlying subterfuge of a good education. I put the spelling book prepared by the great Daniel Webster alongside the Bible. I do, railly. I think I may put it ahead of the Bible, for if it weren't fur spellin' books in sich occasions as these, where would the Bible be, I should like to know?" The man who got up, who compounded this work of inextricable value, was a benefactor to the whole human race, or any other. Here the spectacles fell off. The squire replaced them in some confusion, gave the top of his head another twist, and felt of his glass eye, while poor Shocky stared in wonder, and Betsy Short rolled from side to side in the efforts to suppress her giggle. Mrs. Means and the other old ladies looked the applause they could not speak. "I p'int Larkin Lanham and Jeems Buchanan for captains," said the squire. And the two young men thus named took a stick and tossed it from hand to hand to decide which should have the first choice. One tossed the stick to the other, who held it fast just where he happened to catch it. Then the first placed his hand above the second, and so the hands were alternately changed to the top. The one who held the stick last, without room for the other to take hold, had gained the lot. This was tried 3 times. As Larkin held the stick twice out of 3 times, he had the choice. He hesitated a moment. Everybody looked toward tall Jim Phillips, but Larkin was fond of a venture of unknown seas, and so he said, "I take the master," while a buzz of surprise ran round the room, and the captain of the other side, as if afraid his opponent would withdraw the choice, retorted quickly, and with a little smack of exultation and defiance in his voice, "And I take Jeems Phillips." And soon all present, except a few of the old folks, found themselves ranged in opposing hosts, the poor spellers lagging in, with what grace they could, at the foot of the two divisions. The Squire opened his spelling book and began to give out the words to the two captains, who stood up and spelled against each other. It was not long until Larkin spelled really with one L, and had to sit down in confusion, while a murmur of satisfaction ran through the ranks of the opposing forces. His own side bit their lips. The slender figure of the young teacher took the place of the fallen leader, and the excitement made the house very quiet. Ralph dreaded the loss of prestige he would suffer if he should be easily spelled down, and at the moment of rising he saw in the darkest corner the figure of a well-dressed young man sitting in the shadow. Why should his evil genius haunt him? But by a strong effort he turned his attention away from Dr. Small, and listened carefully to the words which the Squire did not pronounce very distinctly, spelling them with extreme deliberation. This gave him an air of hesitation which disappointed those on his own side. They wanted him to spell with a dashing assurance, but he did not begin a word until he had mentally felt his way through it. After 10 minutes of spelling hard words, James Buchanan, the captain on the other side, spelled atrocious with an S instead of a C, and subsided, his first choice, James Phillips, coming up against the teacher. This brought the excitement to fever heat, for though Ralph had chosen first, it was entirely on trust, and most of the company were disappointed. The champion who now stood up against the schoolmaster was a famous speller. Jim Phillips was a tall, lank, stoop-shouldered fellow who had never distinguished himself in any other pursuit than spelling. Except in this one art of spelling he was of no account. He could not catch well or bat well in ball. He could not throw well enough to make his mark in that famous Western game of bullpen. He did not succeed well in any study but that of Webster's Elementary. But in that he was, to use the usual Flat Creek locution, in that he was a hoss. This genius for spelling is in some people a sixth sense, a matter of intuition. Some spellers are born, and not made, and their facility reminds one of the mathematical prodigies that crop out every now and then to bewilder the world. Bud Means, foreseeing that Ralph would be pitted against Jim Phillips, had warned his friend that Jim could spell like thunder and lightning, and that it took a powerful smart speller to beat him, for he knew a heap of spelling book. To have spelled down the master is next thing to having whipped the biggest bully in Hoopole County, and Jim had spelled down the last 3 masters. He divided the hero worship of the district with Bud Means. For half an hour the Squire gave out hard words. What a blessed thing our crooked orthography is! Without it there could be no spelling schools. As Ralph discovered his opponent's mettle, he became more and more cautious. He was now satisfied that Jim would eventually beat him. The fellow evidently knew more about the spelling book than old Noah Webster himself. As he stood there, with his dull face and long, sharp nose, his hands behind his back, and his voice spelling infallibly, it seemed to Hartsook that his superiority must lie in his nose. Ralph's cautiousness answered a double purpose. It enabled him to tread surely, and it was mistaken by Jim for weakness. Phillips was now confident that he should carry off the scalp of the 4th schoolmaster before the evening was over. He spelled eagerly, confidently, brilliantly. Stoop-shouldered as he was, he began to straighten up. In the minds of all the company the odds were in his favor. He saw this, and became ambitious to distinguish himself by spelling without giving the matter any thought. Ralph always believed that he would have been speedily defeated by Phillips had it not been for 2 thoughts which braced him. The sinister shadow of young Dr. Small sitting in the dark corner by the water bucket nerved him. A victory over Phillips was a defeat to one who wished only ill to the young schoolmaster. The other thought that kept his pluck alive was the recollection of Bull. He approached a word as Bull approached the raccoon. He did not take hold until he was sure of his game. When he took hold, it was with a quiet assurance of success. As Ralph spelled in this dogged way for half an hour the hardest words the Squire could find. The excitement steadily rose in all parts of the house, and Ralph's friends even ventured to whisper that maybe Jim had cotched his match after all. But Phillips never doubted of his success. "Theodolite," said the Squire. "T-H-E. The O-D. Odd. Theodo. Theodolite. Theodolite, spelled the champion. "Next," said the Squire, nearly losing his teeth in his excitement. Ralph spelled the word slowly and correctly, and the conquered champion sat down in confusion. The excitement was so great for some minutes that the spelling was suspended. Everybody in the house had shown sympathy with one or the other of the combatants, except the silent shadow in the corner. It had not moved during the contest, and did not show any interest now in the result. "Gee crickets, thunder and lightning, licked him all to smash," said Bud, rubbing his hands on his knees. "That beats my time, I'll holler." And Betsy Short giggled until her tuck comb fell out, though she was not on the defeated side. Shocky got up and danced with pleasure. But one suffocating look from the aqueous eyes of Mirandy destroyed the last spark of Ralph's pleasure in his triumph, and sent that awful below zero feeling all through him. "He's powerful smart, is the master," said old Jack to Mr. Pete Jones. "He'll beat the whole kit and tuck of 'em afore he's through. I knowed he was smart. That's the reason I took him," proceeded Mr. Means. "Yas, but he don't lick enough, not nigh," answered Pete Jones. "No lickin', no larnin', says I." It was now not so hard. The other spellers on the opposite side went down quickly under the hard words which the Squire gave out. The master had mowed down all but a few, his opponents had given up the battle, and all had lost their keen interest in a contest to which there could be but one conclusion, for there were only the poor spellers left. But Ralph Hartsook ran against a stump where he was least expecting it. It was the Squire's custom, when one of the smaller scholars or poorer spellers rose to spell against the master, to give out 8 or 10 easy words, that they might have some breathing spell before being slaughtered, and then to give a poser or two, which soon settled them. He let them run a little, as a cat does a doomed mouse. There was now but one person left on the opposite side, and as she rose in her blue calico dress, Ralph recognized Hannah, the bound girl at old Jack Means's. She had not attended school in the district, and had never spelled in spelling school before, and was chosen last as an uncertain quantity. The Squire began with easy words of 2 syllables, from that page of Webster so well known to all who ever thumbed it, as Baker, from the word that stands at the top of the page. She spelled these words in an absent and uninterested manner. As everybody knew that she would have to go down as soon as this preliminary skirmishing was over, everybody began to get ready to go home, and already there was the buzz of preparation. Young men were timidly asking girls if they could see them safe home, which was the approved formula, and were trembling in mortal fear of the mitten. Presently the Squire, thinking it time to close the contest, pulled his scalp forward, adjusted his glass eye, which had been examining his nose long enough, and turned over the leaves of the book to the great words at the place known to spellers as incomprehensibility, and began to give out those words of 8 syllables with the accent on the 6th. Listless scholars now turned round, and ceased to whisper, in order to be in at the master's final triumph. But to their surprise, old Miss Means's white nigger, as some of them called her in allusion to her slavish life, spelled these great words with as perfect ease as the master. Still not doubting the result, the Squire turned from place to place and selected all the hard words he could find. The school became utterly quiet. The excitement was too great for the ordinary buzz. Would Means's Hanner beat the master that had laid out Jim Phillips? Everybody's sympathy was now turned to Hannah. Ralph noticed that even Shocky had deserted him, and that his face grew brilliant every time Hannah spelled a word. In fact, Ralph deserted himself. As he saw the fine timid face of the girl so long oppressed flush and shine with interest, as he looked at the rather low but broad and intelligent brow and the fresh white complexion, and saw the rich, womanly nature coming to the surface under the influence of applause and sympathy, he did not want to beat. If he had not felt that a victory given would insult her, he would have missed intentionally. The bulldog, the stern, relentless setting of the will, had gone, he knew not whither, and there had come in its place, as he looked in that face, a something which he did not understand. You did not, gentle reader, the first time it came to you. The Squire was puzzled. He had given out all the hard words in the book. He again pulled the top of his head forward. Then he wiped his spectacles and put them on. Then, out of the depths of his pocket, he fished up a list of words just coming into use in those days, words not in the spelling book. He regarded the paper attentively with his blue right eye. His black left eye, meanwhile, fixed itself in such a stare on Mirandy Means that she shuddered and hid her eyes in her red silk handkerchief. "Daguerreotype," sniffed the Squire. It was Ralph's turn. D-A-U. D-A-U. Next. And Hannah spelled it right. Such a buzz followed that Betsy Short's giggle could not be heard, but Shocky shouted, "Hanner beat! My Hanner spelled down the master!" And Ralph went over and congratulated her. And Dr. Small sat perfectly still in the corner. And then the Squire called them to order, and said, "As our friend Hanner Thompson is the only one left on her side, she will have to spell against nearly all on t'other side. I shall therefore take the liberty of procrastinating the completion of this interesting and exacting contest until tomorrow evening. I hope our friend Hanner may again carry off the Cyprus crown of glory. There is nothing better for us than healthful and kindly simulation." Dr. Small, who knew the road to practice, escorted Mirandy, and Bud went home with somebody else. The others of the Means family hurried on, while Hannah, the champion, stayed behind a minute to speak to Shocky. Perhaps it was because Ralph saw that Hannah must go alone that he suddenly remembered having left something which was of no consequence, and resolved to go round by Mr. Means's and get it. End of Section 27.